too many of us carry around guilt that isn't helping us get better. Did you know there's actually two types of guilt? And today we're going to actually show you how you can use guilt as a tool to help you move forward rather than get stuck looking backwards. I'm here and ready. You're here and ready. Let's make it count and let's get into it.
The REBOOT Recovery Show helps listeners overcome trauma and mental health challenges. Thousands have already experienced healing by applying what they learned on the show. And now, it's your turn.
Welcome to the REBOOT Recovery Show. I'm Owens. As always, Lori is here with us. We are excited that you're here. You know, REBOOT Recovery is a show that helps people overcome trauma together so we can embrace a brighter future. I really believe that today is going to be a topic that's going to help set some people free for some weight and some burdens and things that maybe listener has been carrying around. I'm so glad you're here. And, let's get into it. So guilt comes in all shapes and sizes. You know, some guilt makes us better by leading us to change our behaviors or our attitude, while other guilt, it simply weighs us down and it produces symptoms. Maybe that's depression or anxiety or isolation. But what makes one type of guilt helpful and another type so hurtful and damaging? What is the difference, and how could maybe dissecting that help us? And that's what we're going to be discussing today. I'm going to show you how we can know what type of guilt we're experiencing based on the impact it's having in our life, but also how we can actually maybe use that as a tool to help us heal faster and move forward. And if you've dealt with trauma, surely there's got to be some elements of guilt at times, whether that's from you or from someone else, and we're going to talk about that. But before we dive into that, my favorite part of the show, I want to go through some questions from you, our listeners. Lori is here. She's reviewed these questions that you submitted. If you've never submitted a question yet, I encourage you to get out and do it. We'd love to be able to respond and to help you with whatever situation you're dealing with. Facebook, Reboot Recovery, or email info@rebootrecovery.com. Lori, you're here.
Yep.
Let's do this.
Okay. Here's our first one. They ask, I'm struggling really bad right now. My wife and kids say that they barely recognize the man I've become, and honestly, some days I don't recognize him either. I just want to zone out all the time, like I'll spend 10 hours a day playing video games. I know it's stupid. I feel like I have to change, but I'm not sure where to start.
Well, I'm not a let me start by saying I'm not an addiction therapist or counselor. I don't have any special certification in that area, although I have known many people, especially young men, who have struggled specifically with video game addiction. And in sort of the diagnostic manual, the DSM, video game addiction or gaming addiction is not a diagnosed condition yet, but there's a lot of discussion around this, and there's a lot of debate that says, should it be this kind of discussion? And I think it should, and I think it will here soon. Addiction becomes addiction. I do know this. When we recognize its harmful effects in our lives, but we feel powerless to stop doing it. So we say, it's destroying my marriage, it's destroying my ability to parent, and yet I keep doing it, and I drift off into this world, right, of video games. So the fact that you're sort of starting to maybe recognize that there's an addictive element to it is really good. They say in addiction, whether that's AA or whatever, the first sign is admitting you have a problem. And I say that half jokingly, but it really is true, because at one hand we could just say, well, no, it's just a good hobby, right? But again, when you know it's doing harm now, it's much more than a hobby. So the first thing I would recommend is find a counselor with experience in addiction, an impulse control type therapist, somebody who has experience, and you can find them online. Just Google video game addiction. You can find a myriad of resources about it, but also probably connect with some counselors that way. In the meantime, it might be good to also ask yourself, what is it about video games that draws you in so much? So first, you have to recognize that millions of dollars are spent designing games in such a way to get you addicted to continue playing. So first off, you realize there's a trap set for us that we could easily step into and, become, quote unquote, addicted to it. But the other reason is that in this virtual world that you've created, you control everything in it. You control who your character is, where they go, what they do, and you have most of the power, not to mention you have in most games nowadays unlimited lives and, kind of reinventing of yourself and things like that. And so when we talk about that, sometimes, as harsh as this might sound, our virtual reality can become better than our actual reality. And that's when we know we really have a problem, because your real reality is right there. It's your wife, it's your family who love you, who want you to be more present, who want you there. They're the people, when you're 80, you're never going to look back and say, man, I wish I would have spent more time with my video games. You're going to say, I wish I would have spent more time with my family. And so I would recommend find somebody who's got addiction or impulse control, counseling background, begin working with them, and also begin making intentional decisions. Maybe even ask for an accountability partner, somebody to help you set some boundaries. Say, I'm going to not play for 30 days, or I'm going to play for a limited amount of time each day. And again, let your counselor kind of guide you through that.
Yep.
Thank you for the question, though.
Yep. Here's another one I'd like to give to you. They say, we love the podcast and they're learning a lot. And they said, a friend of mine is really struggling right now and I want to help them, but I'm not sure where to begin. I feel like I'm in over my head. How should I start?
Yeah. Getting in over your head is something that's a feeling I'm very familiar with. I've felt a lot myself. The fact that you love this person enough to be submitting a question is the first sign that I think they're better off because you're in their world. They're better off because of that. The first thing I would do, I think that was the question, right? What's the first thing?
Yep.
Where to start? The first thing I would do is actually create an environment of safety. So I would sit down with them and I would let them know, I love you and I am in your corner no matter what. No matter how good or bad your life goes for the next 60 days, 100 days, 6 years, whatever it may be, I want you to know that I have your back, that I'm there for you. And I'm concerned about you. I'm concerned that I see some things here, and here that I want you to know that whether you change or not is irrelevant as how I feel about you, but I am truly concerned. And would you be open to talking to me and someone else about some of what you're struggling with or what you're going through? And that's a very open, it's a grace-filled, it's a humble way. And if you lead with safety, saying, look, I'm a safe person to talk to, you're going to get no judgment. You're not even going to get advice. I'm not going to give you any infrastructure or framework to begin your healing journey. I'm just going to say, I'll do it with you. I have found that's a very tough offer to say no to. It's hard to just say, like, no, I don't want your help, right? Number two, you might then be able to help them find a network or a person to help them, whether that is a licensed counselor or maybe a reboot course or something of that nature, to be able to help them get connected to other people going through a similar experience as them. And that community, as we talked about in a previous episode, is going to be really valuable. And then lastly, you can really help them make good choices. Check in on them. So many times we make decisions that actually end up hurting us more than helping, and you can do that. And then you can pray with them. So you can actually say, hey, would you mind if once a week we just get together and I just encourage you, uplift you, tell you all the great things about yourself and pray for you? That's a tough thing to say no to as well. A cup of coffee and encouragement goes a long ways towards healing. Yeah. And so the fact that you're there for them, good for you. I wish more people would get out of their box or their comfort zone and say, I'm uncomfortable, but I care about this person more than I care about my need and desire to be comfortable. And that is huge, and that is awesome. So thank you for that so much. So keep the questions coming. If you have other things, we've got a lot to talk about today with the 2 types of guilt. When we come back, we're going to be getting into that. But first, again, email us at info@rebootrecovery.com. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, or whatever the platform is that you're using, and submit questions to us. When we come back, we're going to talk about how to use guilt actually as a tool to help us move forward rather than get stuck looking backwards after this.
This episode of the Reboot Recovery Show is sponsored by our listeners. That's right, with great listeners just like you help make our show possible. So to give and be a part of the team, go to RebootRecovery.com and help us reach even more people. Advice from the Reboot Recovery Show is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for the specialized training and professional judgment of a healthcare or mental health care professional. Reboot Recovery cannot be held responsible for the use of the information provided. Please always consult a trained mental health professional before making any decision regarding treatment of yourself or others.
Welcome back to the Reboot Recovery Show. Again, I'm Evan Owens, and I am really passionate about the topic that we are going to be talking about in today's show. And I truly do. As we were prepping for today, I really feel like it's going to be something that helps a lot of you. So if you're not driving, maybe get out a pen and paper. Write some things down. There might be some good lessons, some things you could talk about with your family or your friends after this. So feeling guilty and being guilty aren't the same thing. I can feel guilty but not be guilty. I could not feel guilty and be guilty, right? So they're not the same thing. So did you know there actually are two types of guilt? There's true guilt, and then there's false guilt. Each of these guilts is designed for a specific purpose, meaning they were designed to create a response in us as human beings. One of them is designed to help us get better and improve our behaviors and attitudes and heart mindsets. The other is designed to make us get stuck in the should-haves and could-haves of the past. 2 Corinthians 7:10, if you're a person of Christian faith, you might have read this verse before, but it says, "Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death." Now, this word sorrow here really points to what we feel when we've broken a promise, a moral value that we have. Many times, it's actually a promise that we've made to ourselves. It's a promise that we've made to ourselves, a moral violation. Now, these two types of guilt, real guilt and false guilt, they actually come packaged. They come to us in a lot of different size boxes from different sources. For example, true guilt and false guilt might come packaged in guilt laid on us or in a package laid on us by someone else, by other people. How many of you have ever felt guilty that someone put guilt at your feet? They made you feel guilty, and you're not really sure if you should be feeling guilty or not. You know, my wife, she always leans towards feeling guilty because she's so conscientious. Me, I'm oblivious that I hurt someone's feelings until she's like my little Jiminy Cricket, tells me, "Hey, you probably hurt their feelings." I'm like, "Oh, you probably did. You're probably right." Right? So, for example, I could make my child feel guilty about something. So let's say he stole something. I can say, "You broke the rules," and that feeling of guilt should then hopefully, the fact that it's earned, it should create in him a more proper response in the future, meaning that guilt that I laid on him saying, "Yes, son, you were guilty of stealing." There should be not just the punishment associated with, but the feeling of remorse that comes when we produce guilt, when our bodies and minds and souls produce guilt. Now, I can lay that on him up until a certain point, until he decides to not accept my verdicts anymore on what right and wrong is. Once he gets his own moral code, guess what? My guilt laid on him, he gets to choose whether or not he's going to respond to that positively or negatively. At that point now, he's got his own code. He gets to decide what is real and false. So you see, this guilt laid on us by other people only works for a period of time. Conversely, if you've ever had somebody lay guilt on you that's false guilt, you can know that that can actually ruin the relationship really, really quickly, because you can actually start to feel held hostage by their opinion of you, even if their opinion is not real. Another package or form that false guilt and true guilt come in, it could be put on us by ourselves. So we can actually deliver ourselves a little package of guilt. You know, I could truly have done something wrong, or in a relationship, someone might decide to stop being my friend, and all of a sudden I'll feel like, man, I should have done this, and I could have done this and that to keep them be my friend. And all of a sudden I start to get weighed down, and I start to believe, oh, I'm not a good person, and I'm not a good friend. And that's when guilt actually becomes shame. And there's a difference. Guilt says I feel bad about a behavior or a thing I did. Shame says that I am bad, right? And that's when it starts transitioning. And lastly, there's guilt that God gives us. So there's sort of three sources there you can see. So while there's two types, there's many sources. Guilt laid on us by ourselves, by others, and by God. And this godly sorrow, this godly guilt, is actually a gift. It happens when we are disobedient or rebellious, aka when we've ventured outside the boundaries, when we're doing things that will actually hurt us in our long-term goals. There's many times that I'll meet people who are struggling with all sorts of symptoms, depression, anxiety, whatever. And many times I can look at their lives, and after having some conversations, I'm able to ask them, do you feel guilty? And I'm amazed the number of times that the answer is yes, but that we've not really identified which form of guilt it is, so we're not sure how to turn or reframe that guilt to make it something that makes us better. Instead, we're just stuck looking backwards. An example of this is if a husband has an extramarital affair, this is real guilt, but it's guilt that should come from themselves, from others, and from God. It should come from all sources, because there should be a repentance, there should be a change, right? On the other hand, if you've even been around a faith community very long, maybe you've had guilt laid on you by others who were followers or so-called followers of Christ that laid guilt on you when really you didn't do anything wrong. You maybe just had a difference of opinion. Now that is not productive, and we need to quickly identify that. And so that kind of guilt we don't have to respond to. We can actually our response can be, I choose not to agree with that. I'm dismissing that guilt. That's something that you have to deal with, but I'm moving on. I'm forgiving that. On the other hand, if it's something that is conviction demands I need to change. I need to change. So if you're dealing with trauma, a lot of times we have people who want to lay guilt on us. They say, you should be better. If you would have done this, you could have been here instead, but you're not. Ask yourself, is that guilt that's making you better, or is it making you look backwards? Right? Or if someone comes in your life, like our previous caller, and says, I'm worried about you. I'm seeing these patterns in your life and they concern me. Ask yourself, what's the source? Does this person love me? Are they trying to make me feel guilty, or are they actually trying to help me? And maybe I'm feeling guilty because maybe they're calling out some things that's making me feel conviction about some of my choices. And you see, we talked about community a few weeks ago, but community a lot of times either bring guilt that is real or guilt that is false, depending on who you hang around with, or it's a community that doesn't expect anything of you and they don't bring any conviction or guilt into your lives. And that's not helpful either. We defeat false guilt by examining the truth and comparing what is true against what is false in the lies that support the false guilt. And when we do that, we actually begin to see the lies for what they are. So, on the flip side, we let true guilt do its work by allowing it to change us for the better. That's the two ways that not only do we dissect it, but that's the way that we respond to it. And when we let true guilt really make us better, we actually grow from it. We fulfill and we use the tool of guilt actually to help us heal, to help us help others heal, and to help us be the best versions of ourselves. And that's what we want. That's what I think we can all agree, that we're going to get better rather than get stuck looking backwards. So that's the time that we have today, unfortunately. I could talk about this for an hour. I took something that's, a giant topic and tried to boil it down 15 minutes. But thank you for listening so much to this episode of the Reboot Recovery Show. We've got some really good stuff planned for you in the next couple episodes. So I hope you'll stick around and continue tuning in. If you haven't yet, leave us a nice little review there telling us if the show has encouraged you. And don't forget to share it with your friends. And until next time, keep moving forward as we overcome trauma together.